I'd like to begin by setting the proper framework for our discussion, which needs to be broader than abortion. Last year, I had the good fortune to read Eric McTax's wonderful book, Bonhoeffer. It's a biography of the great Lutheran theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I've quoted Bonhoeffer's works many times over the years, and the reason is simple. I admire him. He could have been a professor. Instead, he chose to be a pastor. He could have had a sterling academic career of lecturing about his ideas and his faith. Instead, he chose to put them into action and to immerse himself in people's lives. He was not a man of values in the meager modern sense, but of virtues in the classical and religious sense, the virtues of justice, courage, and love, all grounded in the deep virtue of faith in a loving God. The Third Reich hanged Bonhoeffer for his resistance activities just a few weeks before the end of the Second World War. Today we see him, rightly, as one of the great moral witnesses of the last century, a man who fought for the good in the face of very grave evil and at the cost of his life. Another great moral witness of the 20th century was the writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who began as an atheist but ended as a Russian Orthodox. His history of the Gulag Archipelago is an indictment of Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and the brutality of Soviet repression that grew naturally from their thought. It's a masterpiece of modern literature. Like Bonhoeffer, Solzhenitsyn wrote from direct experience of imprisonment and organized inhumanity. Unlike Bonhoeffer, he survived the war, survived years in prison camps, and was eventually exiled to the West. And that's where his story gets useful for my purposes tonight. In 1978, 4 years after Solzhenitsyn left Russia, Harvard University asked him to speak to its graduating students. What Harvard may have expected was praise for Western abundance, freedom, and diversity. What it got was very different. Solzhenitsyn began by noting that Harvard's motto is veritas. This is the Latin word for truth. Then he added this: truth is seldom pleasant. It is almost invariably bitter. Then he spent the next 6,000 words saying what nobody wanted to hear. He methodologically criticized Western cowardice and self-indulgence, the vanity and weakness of America's intellectual class, the, quote, tilt of freedom in the direction of evil, end of quote. The right of people, as he said, not to have their divine souls stuffed with gossip, nonsense, and vain talk by the mass media. He criticized a pervasive Western atmosphere of legalism and moral mediocrity, and the rise of a destructive individualism that now forces decent people, he said, to, quote, defend not so much human rights as human obligations. Some of Solzhenitsyn's hard words came from his suffering. Some flowed from his loneliness for his own country. But while he was harsh in his comments at Harvard, he was also accurate in at least some of what he said. Speaking of his Russian homeland, he said, quote, after suffering decades of violence and oppression, the human soul longs for things higher, warmer, purer than anything offered by the practical atheism now common in the West. The reasons for the problems of the West, said Solzhenitsyn, is found, quote, at the root, at the very basis of human thinking in the past several centuries, end of quote. Our culture has fallen away from our own biblically informed heritage. We've lost the foundation of our moral vocabulary. This loss has starved our spirit, debased our sense of any higher purpose to life, and destroyed our ability to defend or even explain any special dignity we assigned to the human person in the past. Now, I've said all of this to give a context for 4 simple points I'd like to share. I'll try to be brief, then we can discuss them together. Here's my first point. We remember Bonhoeffer, Solzhenitsyn, and other men and women like them because of their moral witness. But the whole idea of moral witness comes from the assumption that good and evil are real, and that certain basic truths about humanity don't change. These truths are knowable and worth defending. One of these truths is the notion of man's special dignity as a creature of reason and will. Man is part of nature, but also distinct from it. The philosopher Hans Jonas said that 3 things have distinguished human life from other animal experience since early prehistory: the tool, the image, and, this is interesting, the grave. The tool imposes man's knowledge and will onto nature. The image, man's paintings and other art, projects his imagination. It implies a sense of beauty and memory and a desire to express them. But he says the greatest difference between humans and other animals is the grave. Only man buries his dead. Only man knows his own mortality. And knowing that he will die, only man can ask where he came from and what his life means and what comes after it. The grave, then, is an expression of reverence and hope. When Christians and other people of goodwill talk about the dignity of the human person and the sanctity of human life, they're putting into words what we all instinctively know and have known for a very long time. Unique in nature and unlike any other creature, something elevated and sacred in men and women demands our special respect. When we violate that human dignity, we do evil. When we serve it, we do good. And herein lies one of many ironies. We live in a society that speaks persuasively about protecting the environment and rescuing species on the brink of extinction. But then it tolerates the killing of unborn children and the abuse of human fetal tissue as lab material. This leads me to my second point. The University of Pennsylvania, this sacred place, is one of our country's premier research universities. That's a great gift to the Philadelphia community. It's also a great privilege for all of you who are students, especially those specializing in the sciences. Science and technology have expanded human horizons and improved human life in vital ways over the last century. They've also, at times, done the opposite. Part of a good education is learning the skill of appropriate skepticism. And that skepticism, that healthy wariness, should apply even to the methods and claims of science and technology. When a distinguished and thoroughly secular scholar like Neil Postman writes, quote, "The uncontrolled growth of technology destroys the vital sources of our humanity. It creates a culture without a moral foundation. It undermines certain mental processes and social relations that make human life worth living." End of quote. Then we need to be concerned.